Okay, good morning, said the chickens. It's 4 a.m. in the morning. I normally don't sleep that much. I get around 2 to 3 hours of sleep every day. 4 if I'm lucky. And I prefer to make these videos in the absence of the hubbub of the day, the activities that normally bring us into that beta region of which we are always oscillating at conscious, semi-conscious moments. So for now, I'm just going to thank you for being here. I am, as shared, making these videos both for myself and for you. I am on more or less a break. Yesterday was day 3 of the energy school. And this particular energy school has been quite good. It's been joined by some incredible souls, many of whom have taken innerdance energy school before through the work of Serena Olsen and Nicole Ramirez. And there are a few more faces that I have not met, or some old faces that have been there before. And this is one of the best ones so far. Much of which has been helped by this documentation activity, these series of videos that I've been making. So today I'd like to bring up a few things that have been in my space for the last months or so that I feel are good to bring up now. We've been bringing up quite a few things on elaborations of what inner dance process is as a philosophy, as an art form. We've been focusing pretty much on the thematic of the dream work. What does it mean to dream awake? And we are allowing inner dance to be a topic of conversation, or even a realm of possibility into the fourth state of awareness, the wakeful dream, that we feel helps us to map out transcendental developmental models. What is the new consciousness? Basically, that if this wasn't just a healing modality, what does this point towards as a destination? Even look at Ned Herman's whole brain model, for example. It's always going to be a mystery what upper right deep quadrant would look like as a destination of the holistic, intuitive, integrating, or synthetic, synthesizing brain, the new brain, the singularity of which all these futurists are talking about. So I'd like to bring up the work of 3 different people whose thoughts, whose ideas I feel very much assist us in understanding what the inner dance holds for us, both in regards to surface and deep structure. So we've already gone through the work of Lev Vygotsky. So in the previous video, we basically looked at the self-talk that babies do. This social speech is what they call it, or external speech, is how babies seem to use language not just as a way of mediating themselves between the inner and outer world. They actually use language as a way of holding the vast amounts of information that makes up the network of reality, the semantic, iconic, and echoic network that holds just so much information that we actually use language as a way to mediate the entirety, the multiplicities of reality in ways that words can do, that words act as the symbols that represent deep structure. So we've been looking at inner dance, especially through the realm of the egocentric stage. This basically acts as the halfway house between the external or social way upon which babies authentically speak out aloud. They basically not just say what they're thinking, not just say what they are now embedding as an inner reality, but which starts out as external reality. But even when you look at the authentic body language, the way babies, infants, toddlers move, their feelings, they dance their way into the world in a hyperactive, right-brained way, both spontaneous, natural, expressive. So egocentric seems to be a point in between the social ways of the baby and the internal and secretive ways in which adults keep their thoughts to themselves, but also hold in diachronic unfoldment the complex nature of reality. Egocentric speech was a stage in our developmental process upon which we're still externalizing our actions, our thought systems, our words, but at the same time that we're on the way to successfully internalizing the world. Inner dance seems to be a return back to the egocentric. So there's an interesting aspect upon which, yes, internalization used to be externalized through the halfway house, but it seems like we're going back. That the inner dance is a feedback into egocentric stages that allow us to become more attuned to the external world, which in fact is an aspect of the internal world. So now we have these three interesting orders: the real, the symbolic, and the imaginary. And this is courtesy of the work of a French philosopher named Jaques Lacan, who took on the psychoanalytic project that was brought to bear by Dr. Sigmund Freud, especially whose work with the Oedipus project or the Oedipus complex helps us to understand how we are now held in the world of the dualistic, the binary, the world of separation. So let's look at the three orders of Jaques Lacan: the Lacanian real, the Lacanian symbolic, and the Lacanian imaginary. What does it mean when we say real? What is real? But what does it mean when we go into the symbolic? And what does it mean when we look at the imaginary? Lastly, before this video ends, we're going to look into the sociological impact of what all of these means. These triadic, maybe sequential, maybe more of synchronic unfoldment of these three different parts: the real, symbolic, and the imaginary, social speech, egocentric, and inner speech. We're going to look at the work of Walter Ong and how he describes the way we evolved over the history and unfoldment of time, how we used to be more oriented towards the spoken word, that primary orality featured for us. So back in indigenous times, we might have been more oriented towards oral tradition, where we dialogued. We basically spoke to each other in indigenous primitive times, before the advent of books, of written words, basically. So we're going to look at how these two inevitably come together through the gifts and challenges that modern technology and modern media bring. The secondary orality is very much a relevant stage that inner dance both mirrors, causes hyperprimes, that we're actually in the stage of going back into the real, but having to mediate ourselves through the symbolic. If we understand that inner dance is partly a remembrance of what it was like to be in egocentric or even self-talk, social external speech that children and babies do. So we get a sense of this listening to the 2 audio sharings shared so far, and there will be more sharings. We basically listened to the dialogue that took place in Kuala Lumpur between me and Ash. We also looked at the post-inner dance sharing that Tom Woodfin exhibited in the last video that we looked at. It helps us to understand what Vygotsky and also Jean Piaget, who was the first to speak about egocentric speech, a certain stage in our development as we went into the adulthood stages that we are in now. We're going back into it as we shift back into the real. So we're going to look deeper into the thought stream of Jaques Lacan, and let's see what that says about inner dance. So let's look at the vesica piscis. The real is here, pretty much the realm of the absolute. So were we to look at the action phrase in the realm of the real, it's both and, which gives us a sense of inclusivity. There's no space for the or either or the neither. The both and the and says that there's no space. There is an absence of the dualistic. The real is pretty much situated here on this side. So let's jot this down. The real is that meeting place, part of the vesica piscis, where descent and ascent now brings us into this, in a sense, this impossible realm of where there's no choice, where there's no separation, where there's no polarity or no tension held, that keeps 2 sides, 2 different parts, or the multiplicities from converging. There is a sense of a collision point, a kind of space where all things meet. Later on, we're going to be looking at the U and the 12 stages of the inner dance process. The real would pretty much be the 11th stage of what normally takes place within the inner dance journey, and that might be called pretty much the unitive stage of the awakening process, where all things meet. So as mentioned, if the real was pretty much on the right side of the vesica piscis, the imaginary is pretty much right here in the left section of the this particular x-axis. So in this horizontal, inner dance is pretty much the space in between. Let's clean this up a bit. The inner dance, or the realm of the symbolic, would pretty much be the journey either from or towards the real and the symbolic. Again, this is real. Sorry, the real and the imaginary. This is the imaginary. So this would be the symbolic, the way it's being mapped out so far. That inner dance isn't so much a left or right orientation, where things are held in either the unitive or the tension of separation that we see in the left most area of the vesica piscis, that the symbolic is the movement, it is the move, it is the journey. It's the transition point between the imaginary and the real. And so we certainly got a sense of that in the 2 audio sharings so far, where in inner dance states, people start to shift into looking at the world in a literal way. In the whole brain model, we start to sense people going into the world of the interpersonal, the feeling-based ways of thinking and feeling, and we look at the way the body begins to move and the way emotions come into the foreground, whereas it might have been more in the background. You've been looking mostly at lower right C quadrant as the realm upon which inner dance happens. We get a sense that the real is pretty much D quadrant, which is the upper right quadrant, and we kind of get a sense that maybe both upper left and lower left is where the imaginary is being held. So the realm of the symbolic is placed very much here in this quadrant. Okay, so at this point, feeling like we can take a break and start to close this video. Before going any deeper into the complex but wonderful nature of the work of Jaques Lacan and Walter Ong, who represents the work also of this teacher, Marshall McLuhan, there are certain things that are happening here. So as a way of synthesizing, maybe you can just word it. You might be noticing, for one, an interesting collision or convergence between these many different thought leaders, especially where language seems to play a key. You know, like when you go into the spiritual environments, there are spiritual groups, especially the ones who are more influenced by Eastern or Oriental modalities, that words can't really contain what these shamans, these healers, these prophets, when they go into rapture, when they go into states of awe, when they go into expanded states, like words cannot contain that deep structure that we feel, especially the sensitive ones. But we can't help but get a sense that that's exactly what words do. It's just that we fail to engage language as a spiritual construct, so that when you do go into inner dance process, or there are a lot of modalities that are also very much flow or spontaneity based, those which awaken the Shakti, Yin, Holy Spirit, infinite life force that we hold deep inside. There are many ways to open this up, and what is interesting is when you observe different sections of the world where people are beginning to really flow, there are these interesting commonalities that do come up. For example, there is a kind of baby language that people start to utter when they go in deep enough that maybe they are regressing, or maybe they're tapping into, like we said, that symbolic order where placeholders like words start to exhibit different properties as we normally see them doing when we're in our normal states. This is very common in psychedelic experiences where people start to feel the relation between the signifier and the signified within the science of meaning. Words are basically just sound images that represent the deeper structure called the signified, or the deep concept, the gist that a single word might be holding in place, like in the present moment, but actually spreads out and goes into an unfoldment when we look at it through our past and as we project it towards the future. That we feel words don't really do it, but in fact they do. That's exactly what they do every day, and we take so much of this for granted. So in the next videos, I still would like to go further into the work of Walter Ong. Maybe we can focus on that in the next one, in the hope that we might be able to ground some of the foundational work that we've set up on what happens inside. How does that affect the locus of control that now is directed towards the outside world? So I pray that these video series are helping you to look at the fields of inner dance. More or less, we get a sense that the baby is a stalwart example of the humanist. The baby really just looks at the horizon of all the possibilities, the experiential notions that are splayed across all angles, all vistas are just filled with immense potentiality. And it's in coming to experience all the different parts, the particles floating across this infinite sense of the field of energy, of vibration, of emotions, that we come to solidify who we think we are. Inner dance opens that up so that we see much more than we normally see, and it takes a certain amount of responsibility to not just bliss out into the open space, but to awaken that space, because that space is us, and to allow that space the opportunity to get to know itself, that the space wants to get to know itself. We are the space, and we want to get to know ourselves. And thus we take our time, and we do it organically, we do it step by step. And for being with this step by step, I thank you for honoring this work. So I hope to see you again in the next one. Have a good day or evening or afternoon wherever you are. Goodbye.